People only have the power that you give them. Somebody can't have power or influence in your life unless you allow them to have influence on you or you give them some of your power. So if you don't give them any influence or power or accept any of their influence or power, they can't have any power in your life or when interacting with you. So, in all relationships, to some extent, you have to give somebody some sort of power or influence. And this applies to situations and places and things too. No item, no idea, no situation, no circumstance can have any power unless you give it power, unless you give it some sort of resistance or hatred or appreciation. Everything is a relationship. It's all about how you look at something, how you view something, the energy that you put into it yourself, and that's what you get back from it. So if you give it appreciation, you'll get more of it. If you give it hatred and resistance, it's also going to show you hatred and resistance. And if you give it absolutely no hatred, resistance, or love, it just kind of gives you the same thing. It gives you no attention, and therefore you kind of become invisible to it in one way or another. That's why most of the time somebody's greatest strength or their greatest power is their silence and not giving a reaction or even a thought to something, giving anything any attention. Because then all the attention it gave you and anything that it tried to do to get your attention goes in vain. And a lot of times, pretty quickly, it can just lose interest in you. And it'll just choose to not even think about you anymore either. And whenever it sees you, it's just like, just looks away. It doesn't even care anymore. You can utilize hatred to get yourself out of a certain space or situation. So if there's something that you don't like and you express that, then it starts to also not like you. And if you show appreciation for a certain space, it helps you get into that space. So if you appreciate it before you even get into it, it can help you attract it and almost slide right into that space or situation. So if there's something that you're forced to relate with for whatever reason, but you don't want to relate with it, you have to show hatred. And any time that you want to relate with something and it does start to relate with you, you have to show appreciation. And sometimes there's just haters out there, jealous people, and they do want to relate with you, so their way of relating has to be through hatred if they just can't, for whatever reason, get into the space that you're able to get into. And yeah, you have to hate it back, but not in such a way that it gives them what they want. You have to hate it back in a way that it specifically does not want. And you have to not interact or relate with them with the hatred that they want to interact and relate with you with. And you have to have appreciation for yourself in the space of them not being there. So you don't have to necessarily tell them, thank you for not being here, because then that might give them power. They'll be like, oh, you were appreciating me not being there. Then they're going to want to come back because they know it's bothering you. But you just have to have appreciation for the space in general of them not being there, and just feel that. And that can keep you in that space. So, the most powerful tools for getting out of a space, situation, or interaction is hatred and silence, resistance and no resistance but never persistence. So never jump to the polarity of persistence, but sometimes you got to be in the polarity of resistance and find a way to get to the polarity of no resistance, because that's when it can finally die out. You know, and maybe there is like some sort of situation, or person, or space that you want to be in, that you do want to interact with and relate with, but you also want to change it so that it's not like a toxic interaction. If you want to change things like politically in that area, that's when you would start to try to do redirection, where you would do that thing where you go to the polarity of resistance and then no resistance, letting it die out, and then finding something to appreciate in that moment that you both can appreciate, and start building on that appreciation so that can fill up the space, and the whole space can change and no longer be about whatever the hatred was, or the thing that you two couldn't relate on, or that it was trying to relate with you with but just couldn't, so it had to utilize hatred. For example, it might be like you have a friend, and you two always like to, or he always, or she, or whatever, normally you two always go out and do a certain thing, and you don't want to lose the friend, but you're tired of doing that thing because it's just not something that you want to do for whatever reason, or maybe it's toxic. You would do that thing where the resistance, neutralize back to nothing, but then you would start to find something that you both can appreciate. Like maybe you would try to play a video game with them instead of doing whatever you two normally do when you interact. So when the time comes down to interact again, bring up the video game or something else that you're both interested in, and start building appreciation on that. And that can be your new way of relating in that space or with that person or whatever. So that's how you play power games. Nothing and no one has any power unless you give it power. But in order to be in a space or interaction or relationship, you have to give a little bit of your power. But there's also ways to take that power back and redirect the power that you give them. So when you give them power, they don't use it in a way that you don't want them to use it, and they use it for something that is beneficial for you, and hopefully them too.